Is it Obachan?ここから何を求めてるの？私から何が欲しい？
Hi everyone, welcome to a new episode of Carolyn Talks. I'm your host, film culture critic and journalist Carolyn Hines, and this is the YouTube channel / podcast where I speak to film creatives around the world about their work, the industry, and what inspires them. And today I'm very happy to be joined by filmmaker Natalie Murao to talk about her short film, Tears Burned to Ash, which is screening at the 2025 Toronto Real Asian International Film Festival. And this is a very interesting short film because it's about this young woman, Tammy, who travels to Japan, and she's in search for connection with Japan, but I don't think she knows exactly what it is she's trying to find. And she has kind of this very brief interaction with Japan and with Japanese people. And I would say just the slightest bit of Japanese culture. And even I would think I think Japanese history with regards to like the attacks of Nagasaki and Hiroshima, because there's kind of a bit of like archival footage interspersed in the film. But before we get to that discussion, thank you so much, Natalie, for joining me today.
Yay, glad to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining me. But before we begin discussing Tears Burned to Ash, I usually like to ask my guests to say a bit about how they got involved in filmmaking and in the film industry. And I was on your website, and you have a very interesting profile, because the way you introduce yourself on your website is very interesting. Like you say, I'm Natalie Yonsei, which is a 4th generation Japanese Canadian director, writer, and creative storyteller. And my work, and this is what I thought was interesting, you said my work often explores identity and generational disconnect through forms of lonely spaces and ghostly beings. And that kind of comes through in Tears Burned to Ash, because I feel almost like Tammy is haunted. So she's haunted, and she's being haunted by a doppelganger, but she's being haunted by these images and these flashes of Japan's past and present. And so I wanted to ask you about that, about just having that be the way you relate to film and Japanese culture and history through film, like being haunted by ghostly beings and spaces.
Yeah, so I feel like through like since I left film school, my films, that's kind of like the thematic ties I've been noticing with what I'm making. I'm not like intentionally going out and making it, just so happens it comes out of me. So yeah, I'm really interested in identity because I'm a 4th generation Japanese Canadian. I'm interested in like I'm really influenced by space and how environments either can shape us or we are shaped by our environments, or how, for example, having a Tammy character in the film, 4th generation, just putting her in Japan, that itself creates conflict, creates tension, creates a lot of questions for her and for the viewer as well. And so, yeah, I'm just really interested in putting like different characters in different spaces and seeing how that affects them. And it just so happens there tend to be very lonely spaces, desolate spaces, haunting spaces. And as far as ghostly beings, yeah, I feel like sometimes there's like a magical realism or a surrealism with my films, and usually it's to do with the younger generation trying to connect with the older generation, or the younger generation trying to figure out more about themselves. And so it kind of comes through these forms of ghostly beings.
Yeah, and I think that's a very interesting way to look at film and look at culture through film, because for a film like this, like Tammy, they said she feels haunted, and she feels like she's being haunted by these ghosts, but she feels like she's haunting the spaces that she's entering to, because no one really interacts with her. She's kind of lost, and like doesn't know how to speak to people, not because she's not fluent in the language, but she feels very disconnected from everyone around her. Like she doesn't know how to engage and have conversations with people. And I wanted to ask you about that, because I read I read a short story that you did that was published earlier this year. I believe it was in April, and it's one called In the Stream I Found My Way Home, and it was a short story published in the Globe and Mail. And I read that, and the reason I want to ask a bit about that, because I kind of find like the story is about you and how when you visited Japan and you went to like the communal bathhouses that are there, and the way you describe yourself is in first person, but it kind of gives like a third person perspective, as though you're observing these people, but you're not engaging with the people in the bathhouse, you're just observing them. And I kind of found that as a similarity with Tammy. So I wanted to ask you about that, like about how you yourself interact in these spaces. And it is very much about how you feel kind of disconnected from Japanese culture in and of itself. So talk a bit about that, about how your own personal feelings of being disconnected kind of gives you like this kind of like third person perspective on your own life.
Yeah, so that's a great question. I feel like um, when I first went to Japan, or like when first went to Japan as an adult, I was kind of naive in thinking that things would just work out. Like I would, pick my Japanese lessons from when I was a kid would come back to me, and I would be able to converse with the locals, or there is a sort of like expectation, I feel like, as a Japanese Canadian, that if you're born in Canada, you'll go back to Japan.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like this is also very like universal with other diasporic communities. This idea of when you go to the homeland, um, it's sometimes it's romanticized. It's often been romanticized in fiction. But I really wanted to show how uncomfortable it can be, and how awkward it can be, because um, like my parents don't really, they never spoke Japanese to me. They're also pretty disconnected in from Japan in their own ways. And so I wanted to not romanticize, not glamorize that feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And I think with that story that I wrote, that one was more of a just example of, or like a process for me to try and write about the experience in a different form. So writing it in like an essay form instead of making a film out of it. But that's interesting. I guess it kind of feels like a top down, like someone overlooking the whole situation, or like kind of me as a director writer writing the essay as if it was a narrative script in a way. But yeah, I am really just interested in these kind of uncomfortable feelings, and I really wanted to put the viewer in that perspective of Tears Burned to Ash. And um, yeah, oftentimes my films involve some like cringe humor, some awkward moments, but I feel like that's really real, and that kind of just shows that there's an internal struggle happening. There's an internal tension that is happening that the main character quite can't fix uh, in the moment, but eventually they'll grow towards resolving it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In Tears Burnt to Ash, like the beginning of the film begins kind of like chaotic in a way, and it is the camera. The camera itself does operate as a ghost, like observing
Yeah.
Tammy in this space, like because we're introduced with her on a bridge, and she keeps going back and forth because she doesn't know which direction to go. She's on her phone looking for a specific location. But I realized in the dialogue, like it's never exactly said exactly where it is she's going. I'm like, are you looking for your hotel? Are you looking for a train station, the bus station?
Yeah.
What is it? Because she does have a conversation where she says she wants to go home to Mio, which is where her ancestral home is, because that's where her great grandparents are buried, right? But I got the feeling when she was searching, that's not exactly where she was looking for, because I was like, okay, or is that where you're looking for? So then why are you not at a train station? Are you looking for the train
Yeah.
station? But that sequence actually lasts quite a while. The film is only 15 minutes, but I think that opening sequence of her just looking is probably about 2 minutes long, which is interesting, because she just keeps going back and forth, turning around. And I want to ask you about that. Just opening the film there, like when you conceptualize the film, is that how you envision the beginning going, and then like just the length of time that she is stuck on this bridge going back and forth? Talk a bit about that, and like conceptualizing the film and opening it there.
Yeah, I think that's like one of my favorite shots of the film. And actually was going to be longer. I really like long takes. I like a lot of slow zooms. And that scene was written pretty early on, just because from my experiences living in Japan, and like every time I revisit, or if I revisit with new friends, there's always like that really like overstimulating experience of being lost in a train station.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's almost like an initiation into Japan, is getting lost and trying to figure out your way through the train station. And also like kind of the point of that shot was to open with, we know we're in Japan. but we're not quite sure who our main character is yet. And so as we're slowly zooming in, we're, Tammy looks ethnically Japanese, but she's definitely lost, and she is
Mhm.
not a local. And I feel like with her going back and forth, trying to figure out where she's going, um, it really just reveals a lot about the character right away. And the prompt that I gave the actor was you're trying to find your hostel.
Okay.
But like, because she's on an overpass, maybe it's below her, maybe it's above her, you're not sure. It says you're close by and you're trying to figure out how to get to that hostel.
Yeah, because I actually related to that scene a lot because I've been to Korea 3 times and
Mm,
I got lost in
yeah.
the train station, and I was Tammy for like legit. I had that experience where it was back and forth, but back
Yeah.
like turning around. And the thing was, it was a train station that I was in before because it was like 2 minutes away from where I was staying.
Yeah.
And I found my way fine the day before, and I was like, I can find my way fine the second time, and I could not. And the only reason I was able to get out was because of another Black woman saw me, and she was American, and she came up to me. She's like, "You look lost," and I'm like, "I am lost." Right. And Tammy didn't have that. She didn't have someone to help her. She did try asking people for help, but no one asked her. Right. And I think that's the other thing that you mentioned, that she looks ethnically Japanese. And I got the sense that maybe it's not necessarily people don't want to help her because like people aren't interested in helping her, but in my head I was thinking they probably think she knows where she's going because she looks Japanese, so therefore she should know where she's going. But it's just like she again is this like no one is really seeing her, and they're not seeing her frenzy. They're not seeing her begin to slowly panic that I don't know where I'm going.
Mm-hmm.
And I had the thought, I was just like, girl, just pick a direction. Just go. Just go either
Yeah,
left or
yeah, yeah.
right. Just go either left or right. You'll find your way eventually. But you said that's like you give like so Veena Yamano, she's the one who plays Tammy. You said you give her this prompt of just like you were looking for your hostel and stuff. Talk about casting her and how you wanted her to portray Tammy, because Tammy, again, this entire film, she just operates as someone who's just like a ghost observing everything around her. She doesn't really speak to anyone directly because she's not sure of the language. She's also just feels uncomfortable in this
Mm-hmm.
entire experience.
Yeah, so we had the help of Chris and Kara casting, and we had a bunch of auditions on Zoom or like videotapes sent to us. And what struck me the most about Veena was like her eyes, her face, just such a striking face. And a lot of this film is just a lot of internally going through things. And so I thought her face was really expressive in that way. And also, yeah, she does look ethnically Japanese, but there's something that is different about her. Also, she has a shaved head. She's a bit more free-spirited than a local Japanese person would be of her age. So I thought, um, let's go with her. And I had some discussions with her about the role and the character, and she's from Toronto. So actually last year when I was attending Relation, I met up with her in person and we talked more about the project and the script and the character. But Veena, yeah, Veena, she's like based here in Toronto, but she relates, even though she's not a fourth generation, her parents immigrated to Canada from Japan, and I believe she's born here. But she still relates to the character, even though she's a couple generations different than mine. She still relates to when she goes to Japan, the feeling like not fitting in per se, or having that kind of Japanese versus Canadian like identity kind of contrast within her. So I think she really relates to the character in that way. And yeah, she was just great, and she's young and kind of like that was my age. Like when I went to Japan, I kind of wanted to show that feeling, be kind of young and lost, and trying to navigate this culture that you thought you knew, but clearly you feel like a fish out of water there. So yeah.
Hmm. And so the thing that interests me about these kind of stories, and I say this a lot, but it's true. But I do one of the reasons that I'm so interested in stories about immigrants, and people who want to return back to their ancestral homelands is that we're expected. But I'm from the Caribbean. I'm from Barbados, but I moved here as a grown adult at 26 with my twin sister. But something I'm so interested in, and one of the reasons I speak about is that again, people who are not immigrants and who don't have the immigrant experience, don't understand what it is like. You know, like we talk about representation and we talk about first, fourth, second, third generation, whichever. The thing is that, and I don't think it's something that I've ever heard anyone really talk about, is that when you want to go back to your ancestral homeland, you have this perception, this belief that you should automatically know what it is like. You know, like you like, for me, when I travel, I watch like YouTube channels and I read like stuff just to get, you know, like an idea of the culture, so that I don't go in like culturally ignorant. I don't want to make the assumption that I understand it just from like reading through the news. I watch like YouTube channels by people who live in these countries. I watch YouTube channels on the food because I love the food. And you know, but research, but like watching the channels, hearing your own parents speak, your grandparents speak. When you go to these places, that does not give you a practical experience, you know. And I think like, but I think traveling to the place where your family is from is different than, for instance, traveling someplace for vacation. You know, when you're traveling someplace for vacation, you're already entering with the mindset of a tourist. You know, you're going, new experience, I'm a tourist, you know, this is fun, this is thing. But if you're going to a place like Tammy's going to Japan, she's expecting to somehow feel like she fits in because she has this ancestral connection. But that's not how it works, because this is a foreign land to her. You know, it is a foreign concept, especially if like her parents and her grandparents didn't speak about it. You know, if they never really talked about it as a place where they have a connection to. So I want you to talk a bit about that, about having the assumptions that when you go someplace that you'll fit in and that you understand it, and then having the emotional revelation. I actually really don't. I am a tourist here. You know, I'm a tourist in my own homeland. So talk a bit about that.
Well, for me, I moved there when I was 21, 22, I think. And yeah, I definitely had those assumptions. And also I've had like conversations with other people who may have gone, you know, like pre-internet days or like pre-social media days. Like my dad's cousins who like when they were trying to go to Mio, like our home village, and they just took a cab there, right? And it's pretty far. And like so for me, I'm like, wow, you just went in blind, right? Like that is really like courageous. But I think there's something about it that's like, I don't know, there's just something really like innately, I feel like in Japanese Canadians or maybe in other diaspora communities where you just feel like I have to go. Like you know, eventually it's gonna happen eventually. And whether you're prepared for it or not. Um, and I feel like for me, yeah, I just like was really naive in thinking that it would like maybe I would feel connected right away, or I would just like fit in with the culture. Like there's definitely things that I do really enjoy, like the food. I was like, oh, this is like reminds me of the food that my grandma used to make, or I grew up eating this food, and so it's really comforting. But then there's other things of like different customs that I'm not used to, and then it's really embarrassing because you mess up. And so for me, like as Japanese Canadian, like there's a lot of, I guess, internalized shame in like not knowing the culture, or like so let me back up a bit. Like when I was writing the film, I was trying to figure out why I feel so disconnected with Japan. And I was trying to be like figure out like, okay, is it just because I'm a, you know, with every generation that goes on, you'll feel more disconnected possibly? Or is this something deeper? Or is there something more personal with my experience of why I feel so disconnected from the homeland? And as I was kind of doing my research and through my process, it always kind of kept coming back to how my both sides of my family were experienced the internment in World War II, where they were forcibly removed and displaced from their homes to internment camps. And that experience is for many Japanese or fourth generation Japanese Canadians, like the root of this disconnect. And there's like no way that I could separate that experience from Tammy's experience. And I think for me, I really wanted to show how the effects of internment still resonate today in like a modern setting, because there are still trickle down effects in the generations. Um, because I feel like often the Japanese can experience or the internment experience is depicted through documentary and through the past and through archival. But I really want to show today what the current younger generation, how they experience it, how they relate to the internment. And so I try to do it in a in a different way, I guess, and with a bit more of a contemporary lens on it.
No, and I understand that, because another thing is a lot of people, and I've discussed this in a few other interviews with about films that deal with the Japanese internment, is that a lot of people still don't fully know and understand that in Canada, Japanese Canadians and people who were like first Japanese generation immigrants settling in Canada were placed in internment camps in Canada. Like the ones who were in the United States during World War II, they were uprooted from from their homes in the East Coast and the West Coast, all across the U.S., sent to the internment camps on the West Coast, and then they were shipped up north to BC and Vancouver, all along the West Coast. There were internment camps in Canada, and Canadian Japanese were interned in those same internment camps. And a lot of people don't know that, and I don't think and even if they, again, you said like most, they might think of it in a more historical context, and they're not thinking, oh, like fourth Japanese Canadians, they have to still deal with the emotional and the mental trauma of that, because their own grandparents or their great grandparents didn't want to discuss that because it was a traumatic experience, because there's the trauma of what happened to their families at home in Japan during the Second World War, and then with the atomic bombings of Nagasaki and Hiroshima, how that affected the entirety of Japan. That there's the disconnect from their families experiencing that, to then themselves being traumatized on the land here in North America by being placed in these internment camps. And something that a lot of people don't know is that in those internment camps, Japanese Canadians and Japanese citizens were forced into labor camps. They weren't just internment camps, they were labor camps. Like you have people who are forced to work on Canadian farms for free, which is technically slavery, and a lot of people don't know that. And so you have Tammy, who is, while she's in Japan, having these flashbacks and these thoughts of everything her great grandparents went through and her grandparents went through in Canada in the internment camps, and then what happened in Japan. So she's sitting in the space between these two traumatic situations and experiences in her history. She's like, I have these two big traumas existing on both sides of my ancestral history, and I'm here like trying to figure out what is happening, because while she's in Japan, like she gets the call from her mom saying something's wrong with Oba-chan, with her grandmother, and she's thinking, wait, I'm here in Japan and now my grandmother's suffering this other trauma and I'm not there. So talk about that, about having that, because the film could have been set in Canada. It could have been totally. It could have been set in Vancouver with her, for instance, trying to do like, because I kind of pictured like what's the alternative from this film being set in Japan? It could be her going in Vancouver doing research on the internment camps, and as she's doing all of this research, the same thing with her grandmother happens. But I just thought about how much more disconnecting and how much more traumatic that is for her to have it while she's in Japan. And it's kind of like this irony, this really dark, twisted irony of a situation you put her in. So talk about traumatizing Tammy while she's in Japan and not being able to return home as quickly as she'd like.
Yeah, so I think what I wanted to do was not traumatize her necessarily, but
she's stressed. She's stressed for sure.
Yeah, well, we call those little flashbacks intrusive thoughts. And those things actually, they weren't going to be throughout the film. It was just going to be at the end as a big burst. But through some feedback sessions, people told me that they wanted to know get a bit more understanding of her internal thoughts and kind of her relationship more with her grandparents and family. And so that's why we incorporated more of those intrusive thoughts or flashbacks. But for me, I think I wanted to show that this Japanese Canadian story could be told, like it's filmed in Japan, but it's a uniquely Japanese Canadian story. It's a uniquely Canadian experience. Even though it's not shot in Canada at all. But I think there's something to say that this unique experience that has happened within Canada or North America has like ripple effects, right? Outside of the borders. And I think also, as I said earlier, like just putting a Japanese Canadian person in Japan causes so much conflict and tension itself, and it spurs a lot of like that internalized shame, internalized embarrassment, and trauma. It just kind of comes up because when you're there, just like in Japan, or for at least me when I was in Japan, I was just thinking like, like I feel like something was taken away from me. Like I could have connected more if this experience of the wartime didn't happen, possibly.
Yeah.
And I could feel so much more connected with my ancestors if we weren't displaced, if we weren't, kind of removed of our culture back then. So yeah.
And a part of an aspect of that is there's an experience she has with food,
Mm-hmm.
and and I thought the choice for the food was really interesting, because she makes her way off the bridge, and she's going through these alleyways, and it's an area where there's these restaurants and these stalls, and she comes to a particular stall that's selling I believe the correct Japanese term is harumun, and harmoon is like the offal,
Yeah.
meat offal. So you see that you can
Yeah.
either pork or beef, and the offal is like the hearts, liver, gizzards. If it's chicken, like the parts that are traditionally sold in like more higher class restaurants. But there's these restaurants that specialize in that. And the reason I thought this was an interesting choice, and again, this could be just my own reading into it based on what I know of Japanese history and culture, is that Harmoon isn't really, was at one point in time was considered the lowest low of food to eat.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason for that was during the Second World War, that food was only really eaten by Zainichi Koreans, which is the Koreans, South Koreans who were, and North Koreans at that time, who were brought over from Korea to work in the garment factories, and those were the women. And they could not afford anything else, so the only food they could eat is this offal. And over time, that food moved from being considered low class to being more middle tier, and then even upper class, because there's upper class restaurants who specialize in selling the more higher end version, like more what's the word I'm looking for? More
like accessible, or like
accessible, but it's also done, like in like super fancy restaurant
marketing marketing change,
right? So like it's kind of like how lobster was once considered a poor man's food. I know you can only really find it at like a really expensive restaurant because it's not considered high class. And Harmoon is the same way. And I thought, again, this could have been my own reading, but the reason I thought it was interesting was because she eats it and it tastes amazing to her until he tells the guy who runs the restaurant, says, "Oh, it's heart," and she spits it out, and he's offended that she spits up, because it is bad manners to spit out the food in front of the person who's preparing it for her. But he is offended because he's like, "How dare you reject this part of Japanese culture right in front of me?" So I want to talk about that scene, because it's like, again, she thinks this aspect of Japanese culture tastes amazing until she finds out that it is not what she thinks it is. And it's the heart, and it could have been any other part of it could have been any part of the offal. It could have been like the tendon, that kind of stuff, but it's the heart. So I wanted to ask about that, because this is one of those scenes in a film where I'm always just like, does it mean what I think it means, or is it not? And I wanted to ask about that, about her rejecting the heart of like, this way, and like being disgusted by it once she finds out it's not what she thinks it is.
Honestly, the heart, there's not too much symbolism with it. I'll be honest, but I love your interpretation of it. Honestly, that scene came about because, well, I wanted to have it set within like overnight. So like, what do you do overnight? Oh, you're gonna walk and go to food stalls, and you're in a new place. You're gonna eat as much food as possible, right?
Yes.
And what type of food would she not be familiar with? It'd be hormone. Because when I went to Japan, that's like one thing I couldn't eat, and I think it also says a lot about like my palate that I grew up with. Like in Canada, like we did not grow up eating heart. It's not like something you find on a Canadian menu, right? We just eat a lot of chicken and beef.
But you see, that's interesting, because in the Caribbean we eat chicken liver, chicken heart, chicken gizzard. I personally don't like chicken heart or liver because I just don't like the texture, but I love gizzard. Give me some fried gizzard and all day.
Yeah, if it's deep fried, I'll eat it.
If it's deep fried, or like the chicken feet, or in Barbados we call it chicken steppers, or but like like chicken feet.
I like chicken feet at like dim sum, right. But I remember when I was in Japan the first time, like I couldn't eat liver, or like I tried to. I'm the type of person who would swallow it and just be like, okay, I'll try my best to eat it and not spit it out. But I really wanted to write a character who was like impulsive, who would be really active, who wouldn't do things that I would do. And so when that scene came up and I was writing it, I was like, well, she would spit it out. And that just says a lot of her. Like she's young, she's impulsive. She also like maybe isn't even aware that that could be like, I mean, it's disrespectful across the board like, in any culture, but she's the type of person that would spit it out right away, right? And I think that says a lot. And I think that that scene also is kind of divisive. Some people end up really kind of not liking the character or liking or like being like, oh, she's so young, right?
Yeah.
But I think for me, I just really I've written some characters in the past that are quite even more internalized, even more like kind of like relaxed and almost passive. So I wanted to have a character that's going to do stuff. And you're like, okay, maybe I don't agree with that, but you're doing something and we're going to keep going and see how this turns out.
Yeah, I don't know. I in my head was just thinking that is the owner of the restaurant. I'm like, swallow it down. Just
Yeah,
swallow it
right?
down because you don't want to offend the person who made the food right in front of you.
Yeah.
But what's interesting about that scene is this is right when her doppelganger first appears, you know.
Yes.
And talk about introducing the doppelganger at this part because this is a part where she's in a way rejecting Japanese culture,
Mhm.
turns around and sees a part of herself that is Japanese. You know, this is a doppelganger who is Japanese, who is speaks the language fluently, who is dressed the way people usually dress in Japan. You know, like her, like Tammy's usual wear is a bit more on what we would call the more rebellious side. You know, and there are many, like a lot of people have this misconception that Japanese people dress very sedately and demurely all the time. No, like there's different aspects of people all across Japan. And she would be considered more of like the more youthful, rebellious one. You know, she has the earrings, as you said, the low cut hair. She wears like the baggy clothing and dark colors. Whereas this version of her has the long hair, you know, is wearing a little bit of makeup, heels. She has a bag and she has the keychain where it looks like sakura flowers, you know, which represents the just like softness and like pinks and that kind of stuff. And she sees this part of her, this other version of her who is Japanese, right, as she's rejecting a part of a Japanese identity and culture. So talk about that, because I thought it was a really interesting place to introduce the character, because it could have happened when she was walking on the bridge. You know, it could have happened when she's just like walking through the streets at night. But no, she sees this doppelganger when she's rejecting, right after she's rejected the heart of Japan, as I'm going to call it.
Yeah. No, so that moment, of course, she spits it out and then she gets kind of ridiculed for it. And that's like a deep shame, like a deep embarrassment. It's like a deep uncomfortable feeling. And so I thought that's when she would see the doppelganger. It's like, oh, why did I do that? If only I was different, if only I had, you know, could be someone else. So that's kind of how the doppelganger is spurred onto in real life. And actually in the bar scene before that, there is a shot of Tammy looking in the mirror or like looking at the karaoke screen, and in the mirror, the reflection, there's a doppelganger beside her. But
Okay, I thought it was
it's
trippy out because
yeah, okay.
I was like, it's not the woman who, it's not the bar madam
Yeah.
who's singing, because I'm like, that's not her. So I'm like, what the heck is that? Because
Yeah.
like I was like, what's happening? But so it was like the doppelganger's reflection in the okay.
Yeah, so that's another moment where she wishes she could sing the song, but she can't because she doesn't know the language. And again, it's like, oh, if only I could. And so that's when you kind of see a glimmer of the doppelganger there. And it's kind of meant to be, yeah, like not upfront right away because, yeah, again, you might get confused. Maybe it's the bar mama there, but it's not quite. But when she spits out the food and she gets ridiculed, like that's like a deep uncomfortableness. And that's when the doppelganger comes out. And yeah, she's like the contrast to her. She is not maybe the antithesis. Like she is dressed very differently than her. But for me, like I was inspired. Like for this whole project, I was inspired because when I was living and working in Japan, I had a student who looked just like me and was like my doppelganger, and all the staff and other people would mention how much we looked alike. And when I saw her, you know, she's a student, so she's dressed in long hair, school uniform. And I was like, this could be like an alternate version of myself if I was ever born and raised in Japan, right? And so I kind of wanted to show that, but in the film, she's an adult, right? So she's not in a school uniform or anything, but she has the long hair. She's dressed a bit more, I guess, feminine, and just to kind of show that more contrast, more of like the what if, how different things could turn out. But she has the same face, right? And so it kind of Yeah, it's just I thought the contrast would be interesting as well because I feel like all of us, not even in new cultures, we just think about like, oh, what if my life was different, or what if I dress differently? Like, how would I interact with the world in a new way, right?
And what was your conversations with Veena with that? Because the character not only dresses differently and she speaks the language fluently, but the way she acts is different as well. Like for instance, the character she's shown as being an actual person rather than as an imagination. She's not just something that Tammy wishes and like and materializes. Almost like a tangible what's the word? A tangible representation of her thoughts. It's an actual woman. It's an actual person. And talk about how you had her play this alternate version of Tammy because she's more, I think, more outgoing than the Tammy that we see, because the Tammy we see is lost. She's unsure how to speak. She doesn't really engage with people. Whereas this woman, like, yeah, she works in the karaoke bar and she's serving, and her job is to interact with her guests. But like, she has these comments for Tammy, which is like, what do you see? What do you want out of this experience? What do you want here? What is your purpose for being here? And she's also more softer with Tammy, in like she's gentle with her, like I'm giving you grace in a sense.
Yeah, I think so. When you first see the doppelganger, you might think it's completely other person, or maybe, yeah, like maybe Tammy herself believes a different person, but as she's kind of spiraling out more in Japan, and as her internal thoughts are becoming more hectic, that doppelganger kind of comes closer into her, and it kind of becomes more of just her internal monologue or dialogue that she's having with herself, right? Kind of these like, as you said, Tammy herself is not confident. She's uncomfortable. She's awkward. Whereas her doppelganger is this confident woman who, she's like saying thank you to the restaurant owner, but then she starts kind of interrogating Tammy, and honestly, that I feel like that's just like the thoughts that go in my head sometimes of when I'm there. I'm like, oh, um, like why don't you just learn a language? Like, what are these things? And they're kind of the questions I had while I was writing this film of like, okay, why do I feel disconnected? Why don't I just talk to the older generation? What are these things that are kind of hindering me from connecting with the home culture? And so the doppelganger is not only a desire, it's also a reflection of herself. And so by the end of it, I kind of, and with other films I've done as well, you you as a viewer kind of wonder, was it really a doppelganger, or was that whole time, Tammy was just projecting? It could be anyone. Maybe the person didn't even look like her. She's just projecting a lot onto these other people, and projecting different identities that she could have if she was in Japan. So, yeah.
For you, like, what do you think it is? Like, you're asking yourself these questions. Have you found any answers for any of them?
Yeah, so actually this whole project was very like cathartic for myself, I think. So originally I wrote it as a feature screenplay. And I knew like the feature screenplay was really ambitious and had a lot of these same questions, and I just kind of wanted to work it out within a short film version. Um, and through the short film, I feel like what I've discovered was, um, yes, I'm Japanese Canadian. When I go to Japan, I can't quite connect with the culture there, but I still acknowledge like where I've come from and my Japanese Canadian identity. And I think, no, I don't think I'll ever feel fully comfortable in Japan, but that's okay because, I'm just kind of acknowledging my unique experience and kind of coming out more grateful out of it, realizing these things now, I can move forward. Maybe it felt like something that was holding me back with connecting with the culture and my own like identity. But I feel like it's hinted at the ending as well, as if like, she says, I'll be home soon. And what is that? It's back in Canada for her. But who knows? Like for me, like I still like to go back to Japan. I love it there. I love it here in Canada as well. And so I think as like these diasporic communities, as our identities become like multi like pluralized, I feel like we're gonna kind of just have to get used to navigating these dual identities, dual cultures, and kind of embracing that as well, right? Not just fitting into one monoculture or one box. So yeah.
Mhm. And I think that's beautiful because the thing is like this world is so big, you know, why do we have to seek our identity as being from one place? Like I'll always be Barbadian, and I have Canadian citizenship, and like when I travel overseas and people ask me where I'm from, I say I'm from Canada. I'm from Canada, but I always make sure to mention I'm also Barbadian as well. And because I'll say, oh, I'm from Canada, but I'm originally from Barbados. And one of the reasons I do that is because it's not me selling Barbados, but it's me just letting people know that Barbados exists. Because there's a lot of people who don't know there's an island in the Caribbean called Barbados. You know, like there's a lot of people who aren't familiar with the Caribbean and the different islands. You know, so most people you think the Caribbean, you think Jamaica. You know, and if I say Barbados, I have to be like Rihanna. You know, where Rihanna's from.
Yeah.
But I do that because I want people to understand that the world is big. You know, there are people from the island of Barbados visiting your location. You know, like I kind of like I see myself not as an ambassador, but just to say like, you know, how when you go to a place and someone will put on like on a table or something, so and so was here. That's kind of like my way of doing it. And like, so for me, like home will always be Barbados and home is Canada. But I also like I love being able to travel to different places and saying like I'm Barbadian and I'm traveling here. And for like what you're saying, like you always have the opportunity to return to Japan, you know, like you have an opportunity to learn more about Japan, you know, and be able to see it from a perspective different from a Japanese person who has always lived in Japan, you know, and you can share that experience when you travel there. And I want to talk a bit about that just as a filmmaker traveling to Japan for filming purposes and being able to discover Japan as a filmmaker. You know, like I had this discussion with Mayumi Yoshida, the director of Akashi, where she was born in Japan and she immigrated to Canada, but she went back to Japan to film. You know, so she had that perspective of seeing Japan as a filmmaker through the eyes of a filmmaker. So I want to ask you about that, like being able to see Japan through the eyes of a filmmaker, but as a filmmaker not born there, but a filmmaker trying to discover Japan, perhaps for the first time through the lens of a camera.
Yeah, that's a good question. I feel like they have a different rules there for filming, different culture for filming. And that part was really rewarding to experience because it kind of put into perspective how our like North American culture towards filming is very different. So for example, like here you rent a location, you rent permits, and you kind of, I feel like there's this attitude of kind of like a colonial attitude of being like, I paid for it, I get to do whatever I want, right? But in Japan, what I experienced was even if you may have a permit for an area, you are still disruptive. Like the space is for the public, and they should have the right to go around you and do whatever they want. So you can't like hold off people, right? Or you can't be like, get out the shot, right? And so I actually really like that attitude because it's a lot more communal and a lot more like respecting of the people who are living there and just getting on with their everyday life. Like they're just kind of working on going to their commute to work, right? Um, and so for me, like that experience is really great, but it also means there's like a lot of bureaucracy in Japan, so you have to get a lot of things approved with higher ups. And so there's like you have to make a lot of maps of being like, I'm going to film here, exactly in this spot, and get that approved by someone, and they get it approved by someone. And so I wasn't used to that aspect of it, but I think it is necessary. But for me, like it was really um, because it's a short, we don't really have the luxury of time to pre-plan too much. So a lot of like locations were found just like the day before or like a week before. Like when I got there, we only had 2 days to settle in and then we started shooting. So it was really go, go, go. And so I had ideas of where I wanted to film, and they do have like databases of locations where you're allowed to film. Um, but it was honestly just kind of like me figuring out where I could best film. I have some ideas, but it's a little like for me, I really just wanted to show how like chaotic Japan can feel as a first timer, and how crazy the city can feel. So like with the train station and just kind of the cityscape. But our the production company we worked with in Japan, Flag, they were the production company that worked with Mayumi for Akashi. And so Mayumi referred them to me, and that's how we worked with them. So without Akashi, I don't think I would have been able to make this film in Japan, because Flag was amazing, and they were the ones that, I tell them like, I'm looking for a train station that has this, and they're like, oh, how about this one? Or like, I'm looking for a rooftop to see the sunrise. And they're like, okay, like they were the ones that really, really helped me try to find those spots. Like I have an idea for it, but they were the ones kind of doing the groundwork of finding them for me and getting the permits for it. So I'm like super, super grateful for them.
Okay, and you what you said about like the policy there being like you can rent the space but you don't own the space was really interesting to me. And the reason I smirk and the reason I kind of chuckled a bit is because like sometimes when I am watching Japanese films or dramas, you'll notice people in the background just like standing there like watching what is going on.
Yeah.
And it, like it's not like it breaks the fourth wall in a sense, but it kind of just be like you can see people like, what is going on over there, let me just stand here. And it's kind of funny. So like that and we don't really see that in North American productions because, as you said, like you may be filming in this location in this one spot, but you can like block off like an entire area around that to make sure you don't have anyone just crossing into your scene who isn't an extra. Whereas like in Japanese productions, you will see people just pausing and watching what's going on in the background. And you say that explains it perfectly that happens, right? But I love that. I love that they're saying, yes, you are making a film, but this land belongs to the Japanese people. It belongs to the public. This is public land. And you can film your film here, but like if someone needs to get to go where they're going, like they can't change their life just for this one film production, right? And I love that. But talk to me a bit about just like working with your editor, Anna Chieko, Shannon, who did like the editing for this film. And again, we talked a bit about using the archival footage that was kind of like you said, like became like Tammy's inner thoughts, kind of like the images flashing through her head. Talk about that, figuring out after you got the feedback from the people who first saw the first edit, like figuring out where you wanted these shots to go and which shots you wanted to go. Like the archival footage, like it's not like super specific. Like it doesn't spell out exactly what these images are, and you can only have really a sense and understanding of it if you understand, again, Japanese Canadian history and Japanese history. And I love that because you're asking the audience, you're not spelling everything else for the audience, but talk about working with Anna, figuring out where you wanted these shots to go and like figuring out which archival footages you wanted to use to represent what Tammy is thinking about.
Yeah, so I think it actually worked kind of backwards. So like we knew we wanted a big flash montage at the end to kind of be like the whole spiraling out moment. And the animations, like the flashbacks themselves, were determined. I edited those parts, like the little segments that do flash. But we had like placeholders when Anna edited it. And those placeholders we used were like anime, from, I don't know if you know anime Evangelion, Neon Genesis Evangelion.
Yes, I love it. Okay, is that how you pronounce it? Because I always call it Evangelion, but it's
no,
Evangelion. That's how you're supposed to pronounce it. I love that anime. It's so trippy.
Okay, it's very trippy.
It's one of my favorite Japanese. I don't watch many Japanese anime, but I love that one because it's so existential, so chaotic.
Yeah, very existential. Very
Tammy
chaotic.
as a character would fit very much in to that universe because all those kids are traumatized.
Yes, exactly. So that was definitely a big inspiration for me. And also like the monologues and like her talking to the doppelganger, those like internalized existential moments are very much inspired by Evangelion. And so I used like a clip of that as a reference, and I put those as placeholders in the film. But yeah, like so it kind of worked backwards. Like that was the main one, and then I just kind of figured out like where they emotionally felt best to fit in, and when she would kind of have those moments. And like the chase, when she's like following the doppelganger, a lot those pop up more. So kind of helping with like this pacing and the rhythm of Tammy's journey. But those animations and those intrusive thought flashes themselves, it was just me like editing at home, and then I print out frame by frame. on my printer, and then I'd scan them and then edit them together.
Okay, Evangelion makes perfect sense because
Yeah.
Evangelion, these are kids who are, they're child soldiers, but they're child soldiers who are experiencing this traumatic world existential ending event. But there's all of these flashbacks in the series throughout the entire series, including the film, where you get Japan of the past, Japan during the destruction, which again for a lot of Japanese anime do focus around and are inspired during the atomic bombings. But then there's, if you watch to the end of the very last film, there's flash forwards of the Japan of the future, you know, the Japan that is healed and healing. So like as they're talking, as I actually think Evangelion makes perfect sense because those the kids themselves have these moments, these flashbacks of like who Japan was, who Japan is, and how they interact with all of this, you know, and how they themselves interact with the elder generations who experience this thing that they know of, but they don't have it. They only have it in an abstract sense. So I love that you use Evangelion. And I've been watching Naruto, and oh my gosh.
Well, also I was interested in like you know, I'm trying to figure out more of like Asian Canadian cinema, like what is our style, or you know, how do we as Asian Canadians adopt things from Asian cinema, and then thinking about like Japanese specifically. So anime is huge, right? So I was thinking about how I could incorporate anime influences in this film, and so that was one of them.
I love that you use that. I love it. I do. You're gonna have to wrap up now, but so my last question I want to ask you is, now that you've mentioned that anime was an inspiration for you, how does that kind of work in a film? Because the reason I think that using anime as a reference in particular is really interesting, not only because of the narrative of Evangelion, but Evangelion is an extremely colorful series. Like it's super colorful. A lot of neons, a lot of really bright and intense colors. And whereas for Tears Burn to Ash, like the color scape is very kind of like desaturated, you know, like there's no, which for again Japan is very interesting because Japan is known for having these super bright lights, you know, like the signs and everything, and we do get to see them, but they're kind of in the distance, whereas the space that Tammy inhabits is kind of like washed out in a way, you know, it's kind of like sedate. So talk about that, because I think like using anime as a reference is interesting, where the coloring itself, which anime is known for, doesn't really present in this film that way.
I think I look to anime a lot for just imagining what visually could be possible, because with like I feel like the layerings of anime are really interesting. Whereas like I wouldn't be even to be able to conceptualize that with a live action form because yeah, because I think it's not so much the coloring, but the layers and the depth that they can portray. A lot of like the crossfades of Evangelion, I find really inspiring. And I feel like there's something just very like you can express a lot of the internalized emotions in anime really well, and in Evangelion in particular does that so beautifully. Like I say beautiful, but it's also like really intense, right?
It's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot. So that's why I kind of was like really inspired. Like I look to that as for inspiration. But as far as colors, like a lot of my color references and cinematography references, I realized later on were like actually shot on film. And my cinematographer, Kayla Wachell, even mentioned to me, she's like, "Do you have any references that are digital?" And I was like, "I don't know, but that filmic look I really like." And it kind of has like a grittiness to it. And so we actually did a technique in the camera where we shoot a really high exposure to get that in-camera grain to kind of mimic film. So that's kind of why you see things that look a little dirty or desaturated or not quite crisp and sharp, which again, as you said, yeah, like Tokyo, you usually think of it as a super neon, bright light place, but I kind of wanted to make it seem a bit darker.
So that's interesting to me because now I wish we could talk, we had more time to just talk about Evangelion. Like no, seriously, like I love that anime. It is deeply depressing, but so fascinating how much context is in it. Like another one of my favorite is Ghost in the Shell. And like I love Ghost in the Shell. And like I'm making my way through Naruto. My friend and I were like, we have to discuss this in like a podcast because that show is fascinatingly baffling to me. And I'm like, what is going on with the writing? It's a mess.
Yeah.
But I love the animation and the cinematography and the fight sequences. But thank you so much for taking the time for speaking with me, Natalie. And Tears Burnt to Ash is a really fascinating film to me. And Tammy is a fascinating character. I'm like, somebody give her a hug. And I hope when she goes home, she can put her grandma to rest and perhaps travel
Yeah.
back to Japan. That's kind of my headcanon of how it ends off.
Mhm.
She goes back to Canada, says goodbye, and then maybe she and her mother take a trip to Japan and they get to discover
Yeah.
Japan as a
Maybe.
mother and daughter, you know, like that's my headcanon. That's what happens. But congratulations to you and Veena and the entire cast and crew. But thank you so much
Thank you
for
so
taking the time for
much.
talking with me.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. This is great. I love your questions. I love the conversation.
Thank you. No, this was great. Evangelion. The surprises.